This morning, there's a big development in the opioid crisis.
A new chapter in the fight against opioid addiction.
America's opioid epidemic.
The opioid epidemic.
The opioid crisis.
The opioid crisis.
Our nation's opioid crisis.
More overdoses this weekend. You're in the middle of a crisis.
Devastating news from Abbotsford, and we have been seeing 4 people a day dying in British Columbia on average.
We are in the midst of a national public health crisis, and no one group or government can address it alone.
Opioid crisis.
Thousands of lives have been lost in Canada because of opioid-related overdoses spiking in the 2000s with an increase in abuse of prescription and recreational oxycodone, according to the Globe and Mail. While Oxycontin, the brand name version of oxycodone, was removed from the pharmaceutical market in 2012, other opioids such as fentanyl and carfentanil have kept overdose rates high.
I knew they were easy to get at that time, and so all I had to do was say I was in pain, and then I would get unlimited prescriptions, and that went on for a couple years. It just took over my life. Like, it was like this dark cloud just evolved over me, and I couldn't see past it.
You don't think about the risks. It doesn't. You put that out of your mind, and it's always just one more, and then after that I'll stop. And it's the same as like breathing or needing water. It's your mind thinks that if you don't keep taking these things, you'll die.
Neurons in your brain are covered in opioid receptors. When you are in pain, these receptors act as a brake to slow down the neuron's ability to send signals of pain. When someone experiences pain, your body releases natural painkillers called endorphins, which activate the opioid receptors. When something good happens, the chemical dopamine is released, giving a feeling of pleasure. This teaches your brain to seek out good things, such as good food or the use of opioids. To keep dopamine neurons in check, inhibitory neurons put a brake on dopamine production until the brain experiences something good. These neurons are covered in opioid receptors. When an opioid is taken, the receptors turn off the inhibitory neurons, which release the brake on the dopamine neurons. This initiates a rush of dopamine, which alleviates pain and depression temporarily, generating feelings of calm and euphoria.
The market that has led to an opioid epidemic in the United States and a growing crisis in Canada is the legal distribution of opioids through prescription drugs. While assumptions may be made that the illegal market is the reason for spike in addictions and overdose, the pharmaceutical market plays a large role in the opioid epidemic within the West. Opioid-related overdoses spiked in the early 2000s due to drug abuse from overprescription and recreational use of oxycodone, also used in Percocets. While doctors were overprescribing the drug, more was being resold on the streets for recreational use. The brand name Oxycontin was removed from pharmaceutical markets in 2012. While the removal of Oxycontin had hopes of lowering the rates in opioid-related overdoses, the hopes failed as a new drug came to prominence in the market, known as fentanyl. Fentanyl is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. A lethal dose of fentanyl accounts for a 2 milligram range of the drug, about a few grains of salt. Fentanyl is much cheaper than heroin, leading dealers to mix fentanyl into heroin to spike the potency, while the dealer can gain more profit, not spending as much money buying high quantities of heroin. Canada's opioid users originally got hooked by prescription painkillers. Doctors have a history of overprescribing opiate drugs, which have led to users getting addicted and climbing up the ladder in potency of opiate drugs.
Although there has been an increase in safe injection sites across Canada, in 2017, 3,000 people died due to opioid overdoses. By opening supervised injection sites, nurses and volunteers supervise users injecting their drugs to provide help if someone were to overdose or if their drugs were contaminated with fentanyl or carfentanil. During an overdose, a user's breathing is so slow that not enough oxygen is being absorbed into the brain. Lack of oxygen to the brain can cause brain damage within minutes. The signs of overdose include cold, clammy skin, slow or no heartbeat, and slowed breathing. They also include dilated pupils, unsteady balance, and chest pain. You must act fast. Apply a dose of naloxone if available. Flip them on their side in case they become sick, and call 911. In the case that there is no naloxone, Try to resuscitate the subject and call 911 as soon as possible.
Naloxone is an opioid that does not produce a high. Narcan is a brand version of naloxone. Naloxone works by pushing the other opioid, such as heroin, off your opioid receptor. This does not eliminate the heroin or other opioid inducing a high in your brain, so 911 must be called in case the drug initiates an overdose again. For heavy opioid users, naloxone can push them into withdrawal, which can include nausea and vomiting.
Aside from overdoses, infectious diseases are something to be cautious of when using drugs that require needle injection. Infectious diseases can be prevented by providing access to detox and drug treatment services, connecting people with health and social services to reducing the number of publicly discarded needles.
Stigma is created when we don't discuss addiction, drug use, and mental illness. If our educators provided more information on this, there would be less suffering of addictions in silence, and we would embrace people who experience this in our society instead of casting them aside. While our institutions provide little education on this, we must generate this conversation ourselves. The time is over to keep the conversations of addiction and drug use hidden and pretend like it may not impact us or a loved one.